Have you ever heard of a silent hero? One who wears no armor, carries no weapons, but is willing to sacrifice everything to protect his partner? He's not a soldier on the battlefield, nor a highly trained agent. He is a dog named Koko. That night in the freezing rain, a police officer was ambushed, a bullet tearing through his body. He had no way to defend himself. But just as the attackers thought they had won, a shadow leaped out of the darkness, sharp teeth, piercing eyes, and an unshakable loyalty. Today's story is not just about a high-stakes chase, it's a testament to a bond that can never be broken. Are you ready to witness Koko's incredible loyalty? Join Dog Stories now and experience this unforgettable tale. The heavy rain poured relentlessly, draping the empty street in a misty curtain of water. The dim glow of flickering streetlights barely pierced through the downpour, casting a dull golden hue over the slick pavement. Inside a parked patrol car on the roadside, Officer James Michael rolled his window down slightly, letting the damp night air seep in, carrying the scent of wet earth and cold asphalt. In the passenger seat, Koko, the German shepherd, sat upright, his ears pricked with unwavering alertness. His amber eyes, sharp as a blade, scanned the darkness around them, as if searching for something unseen. James reached out and patted Koko's head. "Relax, buddy. Looks like a quiet night." Koko barely reacted, taking a deep breath before returning his focus to the shadows. James chuckled softly, knowing his partner's instincts all too well. When Koko was on edge, it meant something wasn't right. Just then, the familiar crackle of the radio shattered the silence inside the car. Unit 21, we have a report of suspicious activity at the abandoned warehouse on Ashford Street. Possible weapons involved. Proceed with caution. Backup is en route. James frowned. The Ashford warehouse. A place that had been abandoned for years after a devastating fire. No one was supposed to be there. He turned to Koko, almost as if expecting confirmation from his four-legged partner. Koko straightened slightly, his nose twitching in the air, as if sensing something was already out of place. James grabbed the radio and responded crisply. Unit 21, copy, en route to the scene. He adjusted his belt, double-checked his firearm and extra gear before starting the engine. Meanwhile, Koko was already on high alert, the fur along his back standing slightly on end as if he too sensed the shift in the atmosphere. The patrol car glided through the darkened streets, its tires slicing through the rain-slick pavement, reflecting the flashing red glow from the dashboard. A chill ran down James's spine, a bad feeling he couldn't shake. This wasn't just a routine patrol. There was something in the dispatcher's voice that made his instincts bristle. Koko let out a low, almost imperceptible whine, as if echoing James's unease. "You feel it too, huh?" James muttered, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. The rain continued to fall, heavier now, drumming relentlessly against the roof. The headlights cut through the darkness, but beyond them, shadows loomed like a bottomless void. James turned down a narrow road leading to the abandoned warehouse district. The building emerged from the darkness like a slumbering beast, cracked walls, shattered windows, and faint beams of light seeping through broken gaps in the roof like hollow, watchful eyes. James killed the engine, turned off the headlights, leaving only the faint glow of the dashboard. He unbuckled his seatbelt, but didn't step out just yet. He wanted to listen. Only the rain. No movement. No signs of life. But the feeling wouldn't leave him. Something was waiting for them in the shadows. He glanced at Koko. The dog had already placed one paw on the edge of the door, muscles tensed, ready to spring into action. His breathing was slow but steady, his gaze locked onto the warehouse ahead. James didn't need to say a word. They both knew. Tonight wouldn't be simple. He tightened his grip around his gun and took a deep breath. Was his instinct right? And if so, what were they about to walk into? The rain continued to pour relentlessly, each icy drop drumming against the roof of the patrol car. The distant glow of streetlights had faded into faint, distorted streaks behind the thick curtain of rain. The world around them was eerily silent, save for the whisper of the wind slipping through the cracks of the old, decaying walls. James Michael tightened his grip around his Glock, his gaze locked onto the abandoned warehouse ahead. Koko stepped out first. His paws landed firmly on this damp ground, nostrils flaring as he tested the air. His fur was drenched, but his razor-sharp eyes never lost focus. James silently shut the car door behind him, the faint click sounding like a subtle warning in the unsettling stillness. He lowered his stance, weapon held steady in one hand, the other signaling Koko to advance. The K9 understood immediately. He moved in sync with his handler, head low, inhaling deeply to pick up any unfamiliar scent. The warehouse loomed in front of them like a forgotten beast. Its walls were cracked and stained, its rusted metal roof dripping steadily into pools of murky water below. A faded warning sign, once reading "Restricted Area," now hung half-torn, the remaining letters smudged with moss and grime. James halted a few meters from the main entrance, his eyes scanning the perimeter. No signs of vehicles, no signs of movement, but the unease clung to him like a second skin. Then he heard it. A faint footstep, soft, barely audible, but just enough to prickle the back of his neck. It came from inside, somewhere in the darkness beyond those doors. James clenched his jaw, tilting, his head slightly to hone in on the sound. Koko had heard it too. His ears twitched, his posture tensed, and his head subtly tilted forward, and then, clank. A sudden noise. Something shifting, something moving inside. A sharp metallic clang echoed from deep inside the warehouse, as if someone had just kicked something heavy. James raised his hand in a silent signal, ordering Koko to hold position, while he took a cautious step forward. His heart pounded against his ribs, his grip on the gun tightening. They were not alone. Someone was inside. James drew in a slow, steady breath, stepping closer to the old metal door. Rust streaked down its surface like dried blood. He reached out, brushing his fingertips over the handle, feeling the damp cold seep into his skin. He turned to Koko, giving a single nod. The dog instantly tensed, lowering his stance, muscles coiled like a spring, fur bristling and instinctive. Defense, James silently counted in his head. 3, 2, 1. He pushed the door open. Inside, pitch-black darkness swallowed everything. Only faint beams of light seeped through the broken holes in the metal roof, creating eerie, pale streaks against the ruined interior. The air was thick with a pungent, unpleasant mix of old machine oil, rotting wood, and damp concrete. James moved slowly, his every step careful and deliberate. Koko stayed close, his nose working tirelessly, inhaling every scent, every shift in the stale air. Then, bang! A deafening slam rang out behind them. James spun around, heart hammering, just in time to see the metal door had slammed shut, sealing them inside. Outside, only a blurry sheet of rain remained visible through the cracks. Koko let out a low, guttural growl, his paws shifting, his gaze locked onto the shadows ahead. A faint click echoed in the distance. Somewhere in the darkness, someone had just locked them in. They were trapped. James clenched his jaw, spinning around with his gun raised, ready for whatever was lurking in the shadows. He stole a quick glance at Koko, as if to reassure the dog that everything was under control. Though deep down, his instincts were screaming otherwise. A voice echoed in his mind. They knew we were coming. The darkness ahead felt like a living beast, waiting to swallow them whole. Koko remained still, but his breathing grew heavier. James tightened his grip on the trigger, slowly lowering his stance, trying to listen beyond the silence. Who was here? Were they watching? Or worse, were they ready to strike? Inside the abandoned warehouse, the thick, suffocating darkness coated every surface. The cold dampness seeped from the concrete floor, mingling with the acrid scent of old machine oil and rusted metal. James took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay sharp. Koko stood right at his side, ears standing tall, body tense like a coiled spring. His breaths were slow but deep. He knew someone was near. Then it happened. Boom! A sharp explosion rang out, not a gunshot but the sound of something heavy hitting the floor. A blinding flash erupted, flooding the room with searing white light. James instinctively stumbled back, vision completely wiped out. And then, bang! Pain exploded through his left side, as if a red-hot iron had just been driven into his flesh. His breath hitched, his legs faltered. The gun almost slipped from his grasp as he collapsed onto the freezing concrete below. He had been shot. His heartbeat skyrocketed, his ears rang, and a searing heat spread from the wound. James pressed his hand against the bullet hole, feeling the warm blood seeping through his uniform. A low, menacing growl broke the silence. James forced his gaze upward. 3 figures stood just a few feet away. One of them still held a smoking gun. The other 2 whispered to each other, their voices hushed but urgent. The gunman cursed under his breath. "Damn it, he's not dead yet." The second man hesitated, glancing toward the exit. "Leave him. We don't have time for this." The gunman wasn't convinced. He raised his weapon again, this time aiming directly at James's head. "No. If he lives, he'll talk. I'll finish him now." But he never got the chance. Koko lunged. With lightning speed, the canine launched forward like a living bullet, closing the distance in a heartbeat. Teeth bared. Locked target. Unwavering focus. Snap! Koko's powerful jaws clamped down on the man's arm. Ah! The man screamed in agony, his gun clattering to the ground. The other 2 flinched, one of them quickly reaching for a knife strapped to his belt. James, dazed but still fighting, knew this was his chance. He stretched out a trembling hand toward his gun. But just as his fingers brushed against it, a brutal kick slammed directly into his wound. James cried out, pain exploding through his entire body. James was slammed onto the cold floor, his arm twisted and pinned down. One of the men loomed over him, his expression cold and merciless. "You should stay down." James gritted his teeth, the metallic taste of blood filling his mouth. Pain blurred his vision, making everything around him feel distant, disjointed. But he could still hear Koko fighting. The growls, the scuffle, the sheer determination in every movement. But this time, Koko couldn't get any closer. The man wrenched his arm free, using all his strength to swing Koko off him. Koko stumbled back, paws slipping slightly on the damp concrete. Pained whimper escaped him, but it lasted only a second. He steadied himself. He wasn't giving up. James couldn't let him fight alone. He forced himself to speak, though his voice was barely audible. "Koko, stay!" It wasn't a command. It was a plea. He didn't want Koko to get hurt, but Koko didn't move. He stood his ground, fur bristling, breath ragged but unwavering. The leader of the group checked his watch and cursed under his breath. "Damn it, we're out of time. Let's move." The men retreated into the shadows, disappearing into the darkness. James lay there, bleeding heavily but still breathing. Koko's gaze followed the fleeing men, his muscles tensed, his paws twitching, ready to chase them down. But he couldn't leave James. Instead, he turned back, pressing himself against his handler's side, licking his hand gently, trying to keep him awake. James gazed at Koko with fading eyes, then slowly let his eyelids fall shut. In his mind, only one thing remained: Koko's determined growl. The rain continued its steady rhythm on the warehouse roof, each droplet echoing in the eerie silence. James Michael lay motionless, his breathing growing fainter with each passing second. The criminals seemed to have vanished into the darkness, but then the shadows moved. The leader came back, his hesitation gone. "No, I won't let him live." He pulled a knife from inside his coat, its sharp blade glinting faintly under the dim light seeping through the cracks. He strode toward James, his grip tightening around the handle, ready to finish it. But Koko wasn't going to let that happen. Boy. Moment the knife was raised high, Koko lunged. This time nothing could stop him. Bam! The leader was slammed to the ground, his knife clattering onto the concrete with a sharp metallic ring. Koko didn't stop. He pounced on the man, jaws locking around his arm, preventing him from reaching his weapon. "Ah!" the man screamed, thrashing helplessly as Koko held him down. The second thug froze, startled, then quickly reached for his gun. But Koko saw him. He released the first man, spun sharply, then launched like lightning. Too fast. The second thug didn't even have time to aim. Before he could pull the trigger, Koko's teeth clamped down on his wrist, forcing his gun to drop instantly to the floor. Crack! The man collapsed, clutching his bleeding wrist, his eyes wide with fear. Koko wasn't just protecting James. He was hunting. The third man staggered backward, his hands trembling. He glanced at his fallen partners, moaning in pain on the floor, then back at Koko, the amber eyes burning like fire in the darkness, filled with unrelenting menace. He didn't want to fight anymore. He dropped his weapon. Then he ran, sprinting out of the warehouse as if his life depended on it. The wounded thug tried to crawl away, but before he could even get to his feet, Koko let out a deep guttural growl. The man froze. Don't come near me. But Koko didn't need to do anything else. The wailing sirens of police cars echoed outside. Blue and red lights flashed through the cracks in the warehouse ceiling. The police had arrived. The leader, still writhing in pain, managed to smirk. Despite his agony, "We may not have finished the job tonight, but you can't stop all of us," Koko growled again. This time the man shut up instantly. Rushed footsteps echoed from outside as the silhouettes of police officers appeared at the entrance. One of them shouted, "Is there anyone in here?" Koko lifted his head, glancing toward the light, then turned back to James. He didn't care about the criminals. He only cared about one person. The officers stormed in, surrounding the suspects. One of them knelt down, his eyes widening at the sight of James lying in a pool of blood. "We have an officer down. Call for medics now." But Koko didn't move. He lowered his head, gently licking James's hand, as if trying to keep him awake. Another officer reached out, attempting to pull Koko away, but a weak hand lifted, stopping him. James, exhausted and barely conscious, forced his eyes open. His voice was faint, but filled with pride. "Koko saved me." The German shepherd pressed closer, letting out a soft whimper, as if trying to reassure him. The distant wail of an ambulance grew louder, but Koko didn't leave. He would stay until the very end. The sound of the ambulance grew louder. Tires screeched against the rain-soaked concrete as the vehicle came to an abrupt halt. The doors swung open, and paramedics rushed out, carrying a stretcher and medical bags. Their movements were swift, yet precise, eyes scanning the chaotic scene with sharp focus. "Where's the injured officer?" one of them asked urgently. A police officer pointed toward James, still lying motionless on the concrete floor. Blood had spread across his uniform, forming dark streaks against the fabric. James was too weak to fully open his eyes, but he could still feel Koko's familiar warmth beside him. One of the paramedics knelt down, pressing 2 fingers against James's pulse. "Pulse is weak. He's lost too much blood. We need to move him, now." They wrapped bandages around his wound, inserted an IV, and prepared to lift him onto the stretcher. Koko didn't move from James's side. His amber eyes were locked onto his handler, filled with concern. As they lifted James onto the stretcher, Koko tried to follow, stretching forward as if refusing to let him go. But the moment a paramedic moved closer, Koko let out a low, warning growl. "Easy, buddy." A police officer crouched beside him, his voice calm yet firm. "We're here to help. You have to let us do our job." But Koko didn't budge, his gaze tracking every movement of the medics. A paramedic turned to the officers. "We need to move now. There's no time." They began pushing the stretcher toward the ambulance, heading straight for the open doors. Koko wasn't having it. He sprinted after them, trying to jump onto the ambulance. A paramedic quickly stepped in front, blocking him. "Sorry, but the dog can't come." But before they could finish speaking, James weakly opened his eyes, his voice barely a whisper. "Koko, let him. Come with me." The officers exchanged glances for a brief moment before one of them gave a firm nod. "Let him on." He saved his life. The ambulance doors swung open. Koko leaped in immediately, settling beside James, his head resting gently on his handler's arm. A nearby officer watched them, a faint smile appearing on his face. If it weren't for him, we would have lost James tonight. The ambulance doors shut. The tires screeched against the wet pavement, and the ambulance sped off into the night, carrying James's fragile hope for survival. Koko never took his eyes off his handler. He would stay until the very end. The rain had stopped, But the tension lingered. Outside the abandoned warehouse, police lights still flashed, illuminating the vast crime scene. Officer Grant, who had just overseen James Michael's evacuation, stood at the center of the remaining police force, his eyes fixed on the warehouse's dark interior. James had been badly wounded and was now on his way to the hospital with Koko. But this wasn't over yet. "We need to keep investigating." Grant's voice was firm. A team of officers immediately moved in, meticulously scanning the area. A strange clue, an uncovered letter voice called out from the back of the warehouse. "Sir, I found something." Grant hurried over, accompanied by another K9 unit. Max, a well-trained Belgian Malinois, whose sharp nose was already picking up something unusual. Max scratched at the cement floor, his nose pressed against a thin crack at the base of the wall. Grant crouched down, wiping away the dust. Immediately, he noticed an odd sliding mark, like a secret door had been opened recently. "This door hasn't been checked yet," one officer muttered, shining a flashlight into the narrow gap. Grant signaled for the team to be ready, then pushed against the metal panel with two other officers. With a deep creak, the hidden door slid open, revealing a staircase leading underground. What lay beneath? Discovery of a hidden bunker, a greater conspiracy. Unfolds moving cautiously down the stairs, weapons at the ready, the officers entered a completely different world beneath the warehouse, a large underground chamber, flickering with neon lights, wooden crates stacked high along the walls. One officer pried open a crate and stiffened. Weapons, and a lot of explosives. Grant strode forward, his eyes locking onto a map pinned to the wall. Multiple city locations circled in red ink. Another officer rifled through scattered documents on a nearby table, his brows furrowing. They weren't just planning a heist, they were planning coordinated attacks. A chilling warning. Suddenly, a small noise echoed from the far corner. Grant and his team snapped their weapons toward the sound. "Come out now. This is the police," an officer commanded. From the shadows, a man slowly stepped forward, hands raised. But his expression was disturbingly calm. He wasn't afraid. In fact, he smirked. Two officers moved in quickly, twisting his arms behind his back and snapping handcuffs onto his wrists. Grant stepped closer, his gaze locked onto the suspect. "Who's behind this?" The man merely chuckled, then leaned in slightly, whispering, "You think you've stopped everything?" He tilted his head, his voice laced with taunting amusement. "What you found today is just the tip of the iceberg." A chill ran through Grant's veins. Was there still another plan in motion? Max let out a low, rumbling growl, his sharp eyes locked onto the suspect, as if sensing the danger was far from over. What else was still hidden? A sudden escape. The piercing wail of police sirens filled the air as officers worked to secure evidence from the underground bunker. The captured criminals had been subdued, but in the midst of the commotion, one shadow slipped into the darkness. Chatur, last remaining member of the gang. Unlike his handcuffed accomplices, he still had a chance. His eyes darted frantically, scanning for an exit. Then, in a split second, he lunged toward a truck parked near the warehouse entrance. "He's making a run for it," a police officer shouted, but it was too late. The engine roared, tires screeched, and water sprayed into the air as the truck sped off, tearing through the rain-soaked streets. The dockyard, the final escape. The fugitive slammed the gas pedal, his eyes locked on the only road leading to the eastern docks. If he could get onto a ship, he would disappear forever. But there was one thing he didn't account for. Koko was there. The German shepherd had returned from the hospital the moment James Michael's condition was stabilized. With James still unconscious, Koko refused to sit still. The moment the police released him from the squad car, he bolted, straight for the fleeing truck, through the rain, through the chaos. Nothing would stop him. Water splashed beneath his paws as he charged forward, weaving past obstacles with laser focus. The fugitive glanced in the rearview mirror, and his eyes widened in shock. What the hell? A dog? The dock was only a short stretch away. If he made it, he'd be gone for good. But Koko wasn't going to let that happen. The final leap 10 meters, 5 meters, 3 meters. Koko went full speed, then leaped into the air, soaring toward the side door of the speeding truck. Bam! The impact was strong enough to fling the door open, making the fugitive jerk in shock. No! He lost control of the wheel, the truck veering sharply on the slick road. It skidded uncontrollably, tires screeching before it slammed into the dock's metal barrier, stopping just inches from the water's edge. The fugitive threw the door open, desperate to flee, but before he could step out, Koko lunged into the driver's seat, snarling ferociously. The man stumbled back in terror, reaching for his gun, but he was too slow. Koko struck, his razor-sharp teeth clamped onto the man's arm, sinking in just as he tried to raise his weapon. Ah! The gun clattered. To the floor, Officer Grant and his team stormed in. The fugitive didn't even get a chance to fight back. He was immediately subdued. The end of a criminal empire. An officer patted Koko on the side, grinning. Great job, buddy. Thanks to you, he didn't get away. Grant stepped forward, staring down at the captured fugitive, his voice calm but firm. Game over. The man gritted his teeth, head lowering in defeat. Everything they had planned was destroyed. Koko stepped out of the truck, his keen eyes still sharp, though exhaustion was beginning to set in. A nearby officer knelt beside him, stroking his fur gently. You saved this entire city, little guy. At the hospital, a reunion. Like no other, James Michael slowly opened his eyes, and the first thing he asked was, "Where's Koko?" Would he see his partner again after everything they had been through? A soft, white glow from the overhead. Light bathed the quiet hospital room. The steady beeping of the heart monitor echoed softly, tracking his weak but stable heartbeat. A dull ache coursed through his body, a painful reminder of what had happened. The bullet, the fight, the helplessness of falling, but more than anything, he was alive. James stirred slightly, his eyelids heavy as they slowly lifted, and the first thing he saw wasn't the IVs or the medical equipment. It was a familiar pair of eyes. Koko. The loyal companion Koko sat by the bedside, his strong frame still, but his presence gentle. His fur was still damp from the previous night's rain, but his eyes, they were full of life. The moment James saw him, a genuine smile, his first in days, spread across his face. "Hey, buddy," he whispered, his voice weak but full of warmth. Koko reacted instantly. He leaped forward, pressing his head into James's hand, his tail wagging so hard it nearly knocked over a cup on the bedside table. James softly ran his fingers through Koko's fur, stroking the dog who had never left his side, the partner who had saved his life. No words needed. The moment said it all. They had been through life and death together. And now, they were together again. The chief's arrival. A hero's recognition. The hospital room door swung open, and Officer Grant stepped inside, followed by a group of officers. James tried to sit up, but Grant quickly gestured for him to stop. "Take it easy. You need to rest." James nodded, but his gaze never left Koko. Grant stood there for a long moment, watching the loyal dog, before speaking. "James, you did well. But if it weren't for Koko, we would have lost you that night." He knelt down, placing a firm hand on Koko's head, then turned to the rest of the officers in the room. "Koko isn't just a dog, he's a hero." A murmur of agreement swept through the room, and another officer spoke up. "We all owe him a life." Koko sat quietly, his expression calm, but there was something in his eyes, as if he understood every word. James smiled, looking down at Koko, and whispered, "We're a team, buddy." Koko gently licked his hand, his silent way of saying, "No matter what happens, I'll always be by your side." More than just a mission, a bond that couldn't be broken. The story of James Michael and Koko wasn't just about a dangerous mission. It was proof of loyalty, courage, and the unbreakable friendship between humans and animals. In the most perilous moments, when James fell, Koko stood. When the enemy ran, Koko was the final hunter. And when James opened his eyes after the brink of death, the first thing he saw was Koko. Not all heroes wear armor or carry weapons. Some walk on four legs, ready to protect the ones they love. Just like Koko. Do you believe in the unwavering loyalty of dogs? Let us know in the comments. If this story touched your heart, share it to honor Koko's bravery and let more people witness the courage of these incredible companions. Have you ever seen a dog as loyal as Koko? Tell us your story in the comments below. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button on Dog Stories to discover more heartwarming tales about these amazing four-legged heroes. Stories of loyalty never end. Let's spread the love for these incredible friends together.